Hi, it's Maria. This is going to be really interesting today. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Today, we're going to talk about how sometimes we realize later that, in fact, there were people that were so strategic and they were planning things for years, if not decades, before crimes, right? But they were planning it and plotting it and strategizing and doing this and doing that. And we had no clue, right? And that was definitely what happened in my case. And so we focus on the truth, because when we focus on the truth of who we are, then we are able to see things from a higher perspective, right? So today, I'm going to tell you that for more than 50 years, there were plots and plans to steal money that my grandparents and my parents had. And I found it totally shocking because I never even thought about the money that my family had. It wasn't my business, really. I was a young girl and I was in school. And so I was well taken care of by my parents. And I really didn't think about how I was going to strategize and commit these crimes 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, right? So anyway, I'll tell you how it started. It started when I first got married. And the reason I got married was because my future ex my future ex was my father's broker at Merrill Lynch and knew my father's estate and knew his accounts and knew everything. And so all of a sudden, we were dating on and off, more off than on, but we were dating. And so he was very insistent that we get married. And he presented such a good case to my father. And my father thought that was a wonderful idea because I was in southern Indiana in Bloomington in graduate school. And he was in Chicago in graduate school, and he was graduating. We were both graduating with our masters, and he was moving to New York, and he had gotten one of the best jobs in the entire country to work on Wall Street. So he just came off as just like this wonderful catch, right? Well, my father thought, oh my gosh, here he is. He knows all about investing money, and I have all this money. And so he's going to help me because he's going to be my son-in-law. So it really kind of sounded like a good idea. And yet, as some marriages do, it becomes an utter nightmare. However, so he was Mr. Chicago, and he liked that title. And so I kind of found it rather embarrassing. But, people just do what they want to do. And there were red flags all over the place. But of course, I didn't really even pay much attention, like many of us don't. And so the red flags were not the size of little red flags. They were the size of huge billboards that are on the side of the expressway. So that was the first thing, was the marriage. And then the second thing was the illegal theft in the divorce judgment. And so, of course, for all of us who have gotten a divorce, we know that a lot of times it's not so easy to separate, and that it should be so clear about the equal division and things like that. And yet, in fact, it turns into sometimes a nightmare, and people are borrowing and stealing just to have the upper hand, right? Well, anyway, so that was the divorce judgment. And the third thing was that it was repeated in the illegal theft in the appellate court, appealing the unlawful divorce judgment. So you see, you have the marriage, and then you have the divorce, and then you appeal the judgment of the divorce. And then you appeal the divorce judgment. So then you get appellate attorneys involved. And then you realize that, in fact, this whole nightmare was the result of incompetence, or rather strategy, and with malice aforethought. And in that case, then what you do is you hire legal malpractice attorneys. And so you see, then you have all these little hands in the treasure chest, and everybody's wanting to take their piece. And so So there was the divorce, the appeal, and then it was the appellate, and then it was the legal malpractice attorneys. And so you get them involved because you realize that that both of the other sets of attorneys screwed up totally. Then it was repeated in family court for an order of protection for harassment. And the reason why that was, many of you know that I wrote a letter because my life was in danger, and someone had tried to break into my home, and I went to law enforcement, and they suggested that actually I take a break and I leave Chicago for a while and let things simmer down, because my ex-husband had a lot of political connections, shall we say, and it wasn't safe for me really to be there. And so when there were attempts to burglarize and attempts to enter into my residence, the law enforcement suggested, Maria, why don't you just go visit your parents in Florida for a while, or go take a long vacation somewhere away from here and let things settle down. And so therefore, I did that. And so I wrote a letter about that. And because of that letter, he sued me for an order of protection, saying I harassed him because so many people had received the letter that, in fact, he was not invited to some Christmas parties. And because he was not invited to Christmas parties, he got an order of protection in a courtroom where his attorneys kind of knew the judge, shall we say. And so he was able to basically get anything he wanted in that courtroom. And in fact, I remember one time my attorney said something, but judge, he threatened to hurt her and more. And the judge said, well, I think a lot of women deserve it. And so it was like, oh my gosh, this is like too crazy that actually I know that there are a lot of misogynists, but I really hadn't really heard someone in such a position of power where he would actually make such a ridiculous statement like that. But in any event, and then the sixth issue. And then the sixth issue was that it was again repeated in the illegal theft in family court for the hugely inflated and bogus attorney fees. So my ex-husband sued me for his attorney fees for defending him for the order of protection for harassment. So you see, it just goes on and on and on and on. It's ridiculous. And so, and of course, that was for the letter I wrote to protect myself based on law enforcement's recommendation, right? So the seventh issue was again repeated in civil court in the defamation verdict. So that there was a defamation verdict against me for $9.7 million in 2006. And now with statutory interest, because there's 10% statutory interest, it would be about $70 million that I would owe my ex-husband. And by the time I'm 80 years old, I will owe him $500 million. I mean, can you even imagine such a thing? It sounds so bizarre and so ridiculous. And it's just crazy. And so, and in that defamation case, they wouldn't even accept the judge who said, oh, I know your husband's family. I've known them for 30 years. So that was another red flag the size of huge billboards. Yeah. And so, so that was again repeated in the illegal theft in federal court in Tampa in the, no. Okay. So the $9.7 million verdict was for So the $9.7 million verdict was for the defamation case, whereby the letter that I actually wrote wasn't even included in evidence. And so there was that, and then it was repeated in the illegal theft in federal court in Tampa to erase the bogus defamation judgment for the letter that was different from the letter that I actually wrote to protect myself based on the advice of law enforcement. So you see, it just gets crazier and crazier. But okay, let me recap that. So it was the marriage in Chicago, and then it was the divorce in Chicago, the divorce judgment, and then it was the appeal to the appellate court in Illinois, and then it was the legal malpractice case against the divorce attorneys and the appellate attorneys. And then we have the order of protection for harassment against me for the letter I actually wrote to protect myself per the advice of law enforcement, right? And then we also had the highly inflated and bogus attorney fees that my ex-husband sued me for, and because he sought the order of protection for harassment against me for the letter I actually wrote to protect myself per the advice of law enforcement, right? And then we also have in civil court the defamation verdict, which against me was $9.7 million in 2006, which now with statutory interest is about $70 million. And by the time I'm 80 years old, I will owe my ex-husband $500 million. Yes, $500 million. It's the largest personal defamation judgment in the history of the United States. And that was, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? I thought so. And so basically what that is it renders you destitute for the rest of your life. And this was in a courtroom where the judge said, "Oh yeah, I know your husband's family. They've been my friends for 30 years. And I thought, oh, and I'm going to get a fair trial here in your courtroom? And so anyway, the next piece of litigation was I filed for bankruptcy because obviously Allied Van Linen moving trucks came. You know, some of them are like nearly a block long. I mean, they're really, really long. And so they came to my condominium building in Clearwater, Florida. And the men just came and they just started taking things out. It was almost as if, I was moving, but he had just claimed all of my belongings. And it was so funny because it really held up traffic because Clearwater it's on Siesta Key, and it's on Sand Key, and so there isn't much. It's narrow, and there's a busy street. It's called Gulf Boulevard, but you can't be blocking off traffic with these huge moving vans, and yet that's exactly what it was. We stopped traffic for hours and hours, and it was ridiculous. As they're moving grand pianos, and they're moving all my bed, and they're just, it was just so silly. Anyway, so that was the bankruptcy trial. And so what happened was he actually filed a lawsuit against me so that I couldn't submit the defamation judgment in it. And the whole reason for me to file bankruptcy was because we wanted to get rid of the judgment in bankruptcy. And that's what would most likely have happened. And yet he filed so that it would be exempted from the bankruptcy. And the judge actually said, well, I'll tell you, I will allow you to get rid of the bankruptcy, get rid of the judgment in bankruptcy if in fact I am convinced that you were afraid of him. And I thought, oh, well, that's wonderful, because I had so much proof of that. And even my children had testified, and they said, we've heard, our dad threaten to really ruin our mother and to get rid of her. And so I thought, oh, well, all we have to do is just have one of the children say what they heard. And so anyway, as that turned out, the children were, I think, too intimidated to actually tell the truth. And so that didn't work out. However, the bankruptcy did not erase the judgment, so I was still stuck with that. But the whole point of having this huge judgment against me was that so he could go after my father's money. And in my father's will and trust, which fortunately there was the spendthrift provision, which does not allow 1 penny of an inheritance to be used to pay off a debt of any kind. And so there's no way that he was able to use that. He couldn't get any of my inheritance. And yet they went before a judge and without my knowing, and they went before a judge without my knowing, and I guess showed her the defamation judgment, and she allowed it. And she said, well, sure, he can go in there and take anything he wants, and can for probably the rest of her life. And so that was just so shocking. And all of a sudden it was just a fait accompli. And then and he and his slick attorneys were able to just go on in and rape and pillage and do anything they wanted. It was just amazing. So, and then the other, let's see, what else did he do? It was the spendthrift provision. And then, in the probate division, there were so many instances of forgery and perjury, saying that all of a sudden, where my parents had left 50-50 to each of their 2 daughters, all of a sudden, one name is whited out, and guess whose? Yeah. And then my sister ended up taking it, and also my home that my father had bought me, and he had 2 condos, so it was 1 condo went to each daughter, and yet all of a sudden, 1 condo went to my son, and then the other condo went to my sister. And so what happened to Maria? Well, she was just left out on the street without a penny, and it was just so ridiculous, because you think, oh my gosh, how can people get away with this? This is so shocking. There was plenty of money to go around for everybody, for more than this lifetime for sure. And yet these are some of like the secrets that go on in court that we don't even hear about, because usually the people are so devastated that they can't even function. They end up drinking, they end up having other kinds of addictions, and they end up being so depressed because all of a sudden they've just lost everything in a criminal way, because what goes on in the courtroom should really be above reproach. And yet you have attorneys, and we all know about the Jim Carrey movie Liar Liar. And so attorneys, really, their job is not to tell the truth. Their job is to convince the jury or the judge that their client should prevail. And they do a damn good job of that, actually. However, it is totally unethical as far as I'm concerned. And so you have the legal system then ensnares innocent people in kind of like a criminal web of bogus judgments. And so once you're involved in that, it can go on, and it has like all these tentacles, like the octopus, and that kind of go into this account and that account, and then this money's hidden, and good luck finding it. and it just goes on and on. And so I really never imagined that my family would end up being a family of thieves. Actually, I certainly had more respect for members of my family. I knew that I had a sister that we never really got along with, and I questioned her integrity all the time. And yet I felt that the way to deal with that was just really to distance myself, and that's what I did. And however, I never imagined that she would be stalking me 24/7 and stealing and lying in court and perjuring herself and forging documents and doing things like that. I really had, I just really couldn't even imagine it, actually. And I don't think many of us do. I know they say that in estates, you can have a fortune and all of a sudden it just kind of disappears and it just goes right through the fingers of the attorneys and the judges and all the people involved. All of a sudden you get relatives that you never knew you had. However, that's just the way it is. It's just really not appropriate, and it's really so unnecessary, actually. And then it gets to the point where it goes from being unfair to being criminal, to being rather. It goes from being unfair to being criminal to actually being where it's a matter of life and death, actually, because people want the money so badly that they will go to any extreme. And then you have all this fraud when it comes to life insurance. So people take out life insurance policies on you, and you don't even know because they forge your signature. And then if they can get rid of you, then they have this policy that they go in and cash. And so you don't even think about those things, or at least I didn't. And I know I wanted to make this to be a really positive and healthy and happy video tonight. But I realized that we can't always be so positive and happy, because we have to, in order for us to really heal, and in order for us to process what we've been through in terms of trauma and drama, we really need to confront these issues. And then once we confront them, then as we heal, we can see things from a higher perspective, and we can say, you know what, I learned a lot there, and I realize that this is the legal system, and this is how it works, and this is how it has been for the last, centuries, the last several centuries. And this is not personal, because it happens on to so many. And so this is what are we going to do about it now? And that really is the $64,000 question. Now what? And so are we going to be able to engage in some type of legal reform? Or are we just going to self-destruct and just say, well, I couldn't do anything? Well, it's been how many years now since my parents have died. And of course, and not only has no one helped me, but in fact, I've been denied legal representation. And yet I understand that on some level, I just wasn't supposed to have legal representation, and I was supposed to have this menagerie of lawsuits against me, so that I can make this video and I can tell you this is so wrong. and yet you are not alone, because this happens. And so we need to really get down to the root of the problem, because the fact that people are stealing estates in the most disgusting way is a symptom of a much larger problem, We need to get down to the roots and see how we can engage in some type of legal reform so that this just doesn't continue to happen. So let's see, what else can I tell you now? I think I'm going to end this for now, right now. So thank you for being with me, and we're going to go on, and I'll tell you more tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.